All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session today. We're here to talk about the FY26 Creativity Grants for project support, and we're specifically looking at the implementation type of applications today. If I haven't met you before, my name is Laura Weiss. I am a program director here at the Maryland State Arts Council, and I am joined by my co-program director, Emily Sollenberger, and we'll be walking through today's presentation. The first shot here is just a reference shot of features in case you are not familiar with Google Meet. Just a couple of things to point out. Do be aware of your microphone, which is the little icon that's typically all the way towards the left-hand side of your screen. We do ask that you remain on mute during the presentation, unless, of course, you are asking a question later on during the question and answer portion. Like I said, we are recording today's session, so we want to make sure that we don't have any background noise or anything like that. To the right of that is your camera. You can feel free to be on or off screen. However you are comfortable is fine by us. Also be aware of the closed captioning, the little CC with a box around it. If you need that, you can feel free to put that on. It is computer generated. Also know about the reactions. There's thumbs up and hearts and things like that that you can feel free to use throughout the presentation today. And there's also a raise hand function, which is the little hand in the button. Like I said, we will have a question and answer portion later on, so we will use that just so we know who has their hand up. Lastly, just to point out, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, there is the chat function. It looks like a little quotation box. You can feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation today. We'll keep an eye on that for any questions or comments. Just know that it is something that is being sent to the entire group and not to just me or just Emily privately. So just make sure you're aware of that as you enter in anything. All right, I'm going to begin here with the first of our grounding slides. The first is our land acknowledgement statement, and that is that we acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choctaw Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. And you can find out more about our Land Acknowledgement Statement project on our website, msac.org. Next is our equity and justice statement, and that is that the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. Next is our vision statement, and that is that the Maryland State Arts Council plays an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do that through our mission, which is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all of the people of Maryland. Next on the screen, you will see our pillars and goals that came out of our most recent strategic plan, which we just wrapped up just a few months ago. And those pillars and goals include access, awareness, connection, equity, and leadership. Next, you'll see what we call our creative meeting actions. And these are just some ideas to keep in the back of your mind as we go through today's presentation, particularly when we move into the question and answer session. And that is to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it will be heard. Use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand. Hold one another accountable with care. Honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas. And balance speaking with listening. Next up here, we have just a little advertisement for our various professional development opportunities and offerings. This time of year, we have a lot of info sessions like the one that we are holding today. We hold info sessions for all of the different grant programs as they open up throughout the year. So definitely check the calendar for other info sessions about other grant opportunities. We also hold topic-specific sessions, oftentimes with different partners such as Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. And actually, tomorrow morning, we are restarting a series that we held several years ago, and we took a little hiatus from it. But we're starting back with Coffee with the Council, which is an opportunity to gather in sort of an informal setting to talk with our staff and our council about different topics. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking specifically about our current strategic plan. And also, we do hold what we call office hours. Those are in-person events that happen regionally throughout the state of Maryland. We're holding a couple of different ones throughout the summer. I know that there's one coming up in Howard County. I believe Dorchester County is coming up as well. I know St. Mary's County is the beginning of September. So definitely check out our Eventbrite page to sign up for office hours or any of these different offerings. And lastly, here is just a little call out for different ways to get involved with the Maryland State Arts Council. We rely on the public to serve as panelists in all of our different grant programs. So we periodically hold calls for panelists to get involved in that process. We frequently hear that that is one of the best ways to learn about grant making and grant writing is to serve as a panelist. So if that's something that's of interest to you, definitely check out our website, the Ways to Get Involved page. There'll be information about the different calls as they become available throughout the year. I believe there are a few right now, or if they're not right now, they will be very, very soon. And it's also important to point out that all of our opportunities, such as serving as a panelist, are compensated. All right, jumping into the agenda here today, we are here to talk about the Creativity Grant Program. So we're going to start with a review of that program and the guidelines. Then we're going to get into the application and what that looks like specifically for project-based support in the implementation track. Throughout, we'll be sharing some helpful hints about the application, and we'll also review the timeline of the monthly review process. At the end, we'll just go through a really quick review of Smart Simple, which is our grant platform, and make sure everyone knows how to register for that if you aren't already signed up. And then at the very end, we will take questions and answers. So we do ask, since we have a really jam-packed presentation, if you can hold your questions until the very end, hopefully we'll address them throughout our presentation. But of course, we would be happy to talk through any questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily.
Great. Thanks, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. As Laura mentioned at the beginning, I'm Emily Sollenberger. I'm also a program director for this program and a couple other programs that Laura and I oversee. So as Laura mentioned, I'm going to go over the overview, and we're going to go through a lot of information here. I'll also note that with this recording, we'll also share this slide deck on the website as well, so you'll have this as a reference later on as well. So just to kind of start at an overview, the Creativity Grant is really intended to support activities and general operations for our independent artists across the state, along with our smaller organizations. Today, we're focusing specifically on the project-based support, in particular, the implementation grant. So there's a couple different options, which we'll get to, but just to note that we're going to be covering implementation today as part of the Creativity Grant. Overall, this program is intended to strengthen the vitality and sustainability of our artists and small organizations to really maintain that and support that strong and stable arts infrastructure across the entire state, and serving those growing needs of relevant arts projects and collaborations with Maryland communities that are coming out of our communities and folks like you. And on the next slide, one moment, there we go. So to get into a little bit more here, the Creativity Grant is available to both independent artists and organizations. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a couple of different application options. There's the option to select project-based support or general operating support. The general operating support through the Creativity Grant program is really for our organizations only. The project-based support is for our independent artists or organizations. So we're going to be talking about the project-based support, and in particular, the implementation grant application that's under project-based support. Either way, whatever application you choose, it is a brief application. It's just 3 questions in whatever selection, and they're generally the same type of question, just a slightly different variations based on the application type or whether you're an organization or an independent artist. Through this program, grant applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed monthly during the allotted time that the application is open. So in FY26, this is something that you might want to mark down on your calendars. The application is currently open. It opened on July 1st, but we're going to be closing the application on March 31st of 2026. So it's not open the entire fiscal year. We do stop accepting applications at the end of March. This is slightly different for those of you who have applied to the Creativity Grant in the past. Last year, it was open through the end of April. So this year, it is a slight shift in the entire timeline where it's open from July through the end of March this year. And just a note, we'll repeat some of these things throughout today's presentation, but you're eligible to receive 1 Creativity Grant per fiscal year. So that is one type, whether you select implementation or planning or general operating, you can only receive 1 Creativity Grant per fiscal year. So a couple of things, some reminders of some things we introduced last year. We introduced the Planning and Development Grant application last year under project planning. So as I mentioned, there's 3 different types of applications under the Creativity Grant umbrella. There's general operating support, and then there's the project-based support, and then there's the 2 application types under project. It's either the planning and development application or implementation. And again, we're focusing on implementation as we move forward today. There's also some shifts in the funding amounts for general operating. If you're an organization who's applying for that, you can apply for up to $4,000. Project planning and development is up to $2,000, and then the implementation option, which we're talking about today, is up to $4,000. Okay, so who can apply for the Creativity Grant? As I noted, organizations and independent artists are eligible to apply for project-based support. If you're representing an organization today, some things to keep in mind, that you must be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so having that IRS designation. You must also be incorporated in Maryland or have a significant physical presence in Maryland. We do accept Model A fiscal sponsorships. That's really a comprehensive sponsorship. So there's more involvement with the fiscal sponsor and the person who's connected to the project or organization. So if you are fiscally sponsored, you probably know that there's multiple models, and Model A is that significantly comprehensive model. If you're not sure what a fiscal sponsorship is, you probably are not in a fiscal sponsorship, but if you do have questions about what that means, the different models, just be in touch with Laura and myself, and we're happy to connect with you further about that. You can also be a unit of government, so somebody that's from a town or a city, county agency, another state agency that might have a significant arts program or project. You can apply for the Creativity Grant. We also accept applications from colleges and universities or different schools that have public programming. With the Creativity Grant, organizations that have an allowable income of $50,000 or less, or organizations with allowable income of more than $50,000 who have not received State Arts Council funding through general operating support programs in the current fiscal year can apply. So we've called out a couple of different programs that we offer. So if you've received general operating support through our Grants for Organization program, also known as GFO, County Arts Development. So if you're a county arts agency, if you're part of an A&E district, or included in the Folk Life Network and getting general operating through those programs, you are not eligible for a Creativity Grant, whether that be general operating or the project track. If you're not currently supported through those programs in FY26, you could apply for support through the Creativity Grant, most likely. And again, you can receive, we accept one application per project or program for funding. So say you might be collaborating with a couple other folks, maybe 2 or 3 different artists. We would only accept one application for that collaborative project as a whole. You couldn't submit separate applications for the different pieces. If you do have questions about that, just be in touch with us. Organizations must also produce or present arts programs, services, or projects that are open to the community and available to the public. And then the organization has operated as an arts organization or arts program for at least one fiscal year and must be able to submit a financial statement for your most recently completed fiscal year at the time of that application. Again, if you're not sure if your organization is eligible for support, just again, reach out to us and we'd be happy to discuss that further. Okay, and then moving on to our independent artists, you are eligible to apply for the project-based support. An eligible project or an eligible artist must submit without affiliation to an organization. So it would be independent, so it's your project, not another organization's project. You must be a Maryland resident, 18 years of age or older. You cannot be enrolled in high school or undergraduate or other graduate degrees. So currently, if you've completed that, then that's great, but you can't be currently enrolled in school at this time when you're applying for Creativity Grant. The proposed projects and activities must take place in Maryland. And again, we're only accepting one application per project, whether you're an organization or a independent artist. So what the Creativity Grant can support, it really can support any direct expenses related to the arts project that you're submitting through the Creativity Grant. Some of those things might be artist fees or stipends, consultant fees, expenses related to marketing and promotions, artistic materials and supplies that might be needed for your project. If you happen to need to rent a space or a venue, for a temporary time for your project, you can include those expenses and any other types of equipment that might be needed, whether you're renting equipment or you might need to purchase equipment that is specifically for your project that is eligible as well. What it can't support are re-granting or scholarships through the Creativity Grant. It cannot support capital improvements or permanent equipment, activities that are not open to the public or might be primarily therapeutic in nature. Travel outside of Maryland is not allowable through the Creativity Grant unless you're applying to the planning grant for planning and research. Take a look at those guidelines and the information session that we recorded for that if that's something, or be in touch with Laura or myself if you're planning travel outside of the state. It also cannot support day-to-day expenses that are connected to for-profit businesses. So that might be an LLC, C Corp, S Corp, or the like. And with any MSAC grant, funds cannot be used for political contributions or lobbying activities. And if you're not sure, just ask us. We're happy to walk through it with you. So again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a couple different application types. So if you're choosing the project-based support, you have the option of selecting planning and development or implementation. And that, again, is an option for both artists and organizations. There's also the track for organizations looking for general operating support, and that's a separate application. Again, as I mentioned, there's 3 narrative questions for whatever application you choose. Generally the same questions, but just slightly shifted in terms of the nature, whether if it's for planning, implementation, or general operating. Again, if it's project-based, it's primarily, we want you to focus specifically on that project or program or event proposal, whereas if it's general operating, you would focus on the full scope of your organization's programs and operations throughout the year. So just slightly different. Organizations are also required to upload a financial statement. That's not needed for our independent artists. It's really just for our organizations. Okay, so we've mentioned a couple of different types of applications. So if you're determining, whether your proposal is better suited for the planning and development grant, or if it's better suited for implementation, you might consider some of these questions as you're navigating the different options and where you're at in your creative process. So the first question might be, where are you at in your creative process? If you're in the early phase of a project, or you're kind of in the development phase of figuring out what your project might look like moving forward, you might be better suited for planning and development. If you're in the later phases, you might be better suited for implementation. So you might want to consider the overall scope of your activities and timeline of the overall project when you're looking at the different types. Something else you might want to ask yourself is, does your current proposal include a quote unquote final product that would be seen or experienced by the public? If yes, then you'd probably be better suited for this implementation grant. You might also ask yourself, does the current proposal focus specifically on the beginning steps or phases of a larger project? If yes, then you'd probably be suited best for a planning and development grant. And then finally, if you are asking, does the current proposal include plans for research and development of a project that might not be seen or experienced by the public until a later phase in the project, then yes, it would likely be better suited for planning and development. So some examples of what planning and development grants might include. Again, this is just some examples that we see commonly. It might include research and development for a project. So that might include travel outside of Maryland for research and planning. So as I noted earlier, the planning and development application is the only one where you could include travel outside of the state specifically for planning and development needs. It might also include artist time or stipend for developing and creating your work that doesn't necessarily have a concrete plan moving forward, or that end product isn't necessarily fully developed. So you might just need the time to write or paint or compose, and that's okay to just include that part with your general goals in a planning and development grant. You might also be creating a proof of concept, maybe working on a workshop that's part of a beginning phase of a larger product, a demo for a larger product. Those sorts of things would be planning and development. Examples of the implementation grant, that might include that final product that we've mentioned. So something that would be experienced by an audience or the public here in Maryland. So that might include things like an exhibition or a show, a concert, productions, perhaps album recordings or publications, those kind of final things to complete a project. Okay, and another question we get often is, do you have to have a planning development and then get an implementation, or vice versa? You can receive one or the other. You do not necessarily have to get a planning development grant to get an implementation, or vice versa. So you can get a planning and development grant in one fiscal year and then come back the next fiscal year for an implementation grant for the same project. If a planning and development grant is received, there's no expectation to then apply for implementation later. Again, you can do one or the other, just kind of determining where you're at in your creative process. And there's no benefit either way. Each grant type has its own scoring rubric and has different sets of panelists reviewing from one year to the next. So it's likely that it won't be seen by the same group of people. And your implementation application isn't necessarily considered stronger just because it received planning and development in a previous fiscal year. Okay, I'm going to actually pass it over to Laura to go into the application.
Great, thank you, Emily. So we're going to walk through in the next couple of slides the 3 narrative questions that are a part of the implementation grant application. What you're going to see on the screen is the question is at the top of the screen, and then below it in italics, you're going to see what we call the excellent to outstanding response according to the scoring rubric. So this is exactly what the panelists are looking for within your response. So the first question is actually a 2-parter. The first, 1A, is to describe your proposed arts activity, event, or project. And within your response, include specific logistical details of executing your proposed activity. 1B is to describe your plans for community engagement, the goals or intended impact of the arts activity on the community, and the geographic area the project will serve. So what the panelists are looking for in an excellent to outstanding response would be a clear, specific, and thorough explanation of the artist's proposed arts activity, event, or project, and a clear and thorough evidence of goals or intended community impact, including engagement, intention, timeliness, and/or inspiration in relation to the defined community's needs. So thinking about that question, we have a couple of helpful hints that we like to point out. The first is that, that first question in particular, 1A, you're really looking at introducing the entire project. So we really recommend that you describe the activity with really specific details. And that would include those, those 5 basic, the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of the project. Make sure that you're really including those logistical details of the proposed activity. And within those logistical details, make sure you include who you are too. Often that is one that I see often forgotten, is explaining who you are, what your artistic background or practice is in relation to the project and what you're doing in the project. So make sure you include that information about yourself along with the logistical details of when it's happening, where it's happening, why it's happening, etc. When you approach your narrative, when you're working on your draft, keep in the back of your mind that the reader, the panelists, they have no idea what your proposal is. They've never met you. They don't know anything about what you're proposing. So really give them that full picture, really paint the entire picture of the entire proposal so that they're really understanding what you're hoping to do with this project. A useful exercise that Emily and I, we recommend this all of the time to different applicants, is sharing a draft of your application with a trusted friend or family member or coworker or colleague, somebody who knows you but doesn't know anything about what you're proposing, and really have them, kind of quote unquote poke holes into the application. Have them go, okay, I understand what you're doing, but you never told me where you're doing it. It's a really useful exercise to see the details that you might know internally, but you haven't communicated in the written application. So that's something that we definitely recommend as an exercise. The second question is focused on the schedule. It asks you to describe the timeline of your proposed arts activity. Within your response, include a detailed schedule of the project, including specific timing as it relates to steps of planning, promotional efforts, expenditure of funds, implementation and execution of the events or activities, and evaluation. And again, you'll see here that excellent to outstanding response according to the scoring rubric is to include clear, specific, and realistic timeline demonstrating a realistic schedule, including specific timing as it relates to the expenditure of funds, planning, promotional efforts, implementation of the events or activities, and evaluation. So it's really giving you specific things that it's looking for. All of those steps, it's looking for that within the timeline. Again, some helpful hints to keep in the back of your mind here is really think about that full timeline or that full schedule for the entirety of the project, starting at the very beginning and going all the way to the end. What we recommend, or what we see often in successful applications, is really breaking that down into some kind of time increment. So that might be a weekly schedule or a monthly listing of all of the steps that you're going to be completing within that time frame. We also recommend including specific dates or time frames whenever possible within that schedule. And again, we're really looking for this, all of the steps. So starting with planning and moving into implementation, execution, and evaluation of the project, and really explicitly listing all of those steps. That's what the panelists are looking for here. The last question has to do with the financials of the project, and you're asked to describe the overall budget for the proposed project. Within your response, include a clear listing of all projected expenses for the project, sources of income beyond the MSAC request, and how the MSAC funding will be used. And again, the excellent to outstanding response here is to have a clear, detailed, and realistic financial plan for income and expenses tied to the proposed project. Excuse me. Again, a couple of helpful hints here. We're really looking, again, for that clear listing that shows specific line items for all of your planned income and all of your planned expenses. What we recommend is having within the listing there of the different line items, you might include details about how you got to that total. So for example, if you had in your expenses, the artist fee is going to cost $500, that's great. We absolutely want to see artist expenses, artist fees within that budget. But including information on how you determined that rate of $500 is helpful for the panelists to understand. So that might be based on an hourly rate or a flat fee or a quote of some type. Having that information here and breaking down those different line items with that specific information is going to be very helpful for panelists to understand. Another helpful hint is to make sure that the response must be within the context of the narrative itself. So any kind of attachments with, a full budget, or if you're an organization and you're including financials from your last completed fiscal year, that's not going to be considered within the scoring of this. So make sure that everything is included within that actual narrative box. That's what's going to be reviewed and scored by the panelists. Additionally, after the 3 narrative questions, you're going to be asked for a couple of other things at the very end of the application. You'll have to include a signed and completed W-9. This is so if you are awarded the grant funds, we're able to process that funding for you. And at the very, very end, there is an electronic signature for you to finish. That is simply typing your name into the signature box at the very end. And like we said at the beginning, if you are an organization, you'll have to include a financial statement for your last completed fiscal year. All of this information, the full application, along with the full scoring rubric, can be found on msac.org. We do recommend that you take a look at that, really, take a good read through that scoring rubric to, again, understand exactly what the panelists are looking for when they're reading and scoring your application. So the review process and what's ahead. Again, we've said this a couple of times, but the implementation grant for the creativity grant, it's available for up to $4,000. Again, you're eligible for 1 creativity grant per fiscal year. So that means either implementation or planning and development, or if you're an organization, the general operating support. You can receive one per fiscal year. And when we're referring to fiscal year, it's our fiscal year. So that runs on July 1st through June 30th of every year. The creativity grants are what we're calling an all or none grant. And what that means is if you are awarded, you will receive the requested amount. So we don't offer, a percentage of the amount or a portion of the amount based on your score or something like that. If you ask for $4,000 and you are awarded, that's what your grant will be, is for $4,000. Looking at the monthly application review process that Emily talked about at the beginning. So applications are accepted on a rolling basis and they're reviewed and awarded monthly. They are open right now, the FY26 applications. They opened on July 1st and they will be accepted, like Emily said at the beginning, until March 31st of 2026. Creativity applications, they're basically batched within the month that they are received. So everything received in 1 month will then be reviewed by the panel in the following month, and then notifications are sent at the very beginning of the following month after that. So an example of how that works would be applications received in the month of August. So from the first day of August to the end of the last day of August, all of those will be batched together and they will be reviewed in the month of September, and then notifications would be sent by early October. And that just continues on the kind of continuous cycle all the way through next spring. It's important to just point out that all of our applications are reviewed by public panelists. So there's a dedicated group of panelists who are reviewing the project-based applications only, and there's an entirely separate group of panelists that are reviewing the general operating support applications. The panelists, they are members from the public who they applied to serve as panelists for this year. So they receive very specific training about the program. They go through training of the application and the scoring rubrics, and they also receive training in implicit bias in the grant making process. We work with them very closely. We're here to support them throughout that process. So they are the ones that are reviewing the applications. Staff do not review applications. I don't review them. Emily doesn't review them. But we do provide support throughout the process. And that's support both for the applicants and, like I said, the panelists as well. The way that notifications work is if you do receive that notification that you are awarded a grant, congratulations, that's very exciting news. Like we've said, you are only eligible for that one creativity grant per fiscal year. So once you've been awarded an FY26 creativity grant, that would mean you are not eligible to receive another creativity grant until the FY27 cycle opens. One of the first steps that you need to complete is that you need to sign and return your grant agreement form. That information will be included in the notification email that you receive. And all of that's going to be through the grant portal, which is called Smart Simple. And we'll talk about that in just a couple of slides as well. Something important to point out is that payment takes approximately 6 to 8 weeks from the date of the receipt of the fully executed grant agreement. So once you sign your grant agreement form, it will then be countersigned by MSAC staff. And from that point, it takes approximately 6 to 8 weeks. The processing happens outside of our offices, so it does take, time to go through those processes, but keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about when you need the funding. You might want to plan that out. If you're awarded a creativity grant, you will have a final report that's associated with that funding. There's 2 different deadlines depending on when you submit your creativity application. So applications that are submitted between July and December will have a final report deadline of August 15th, 2026. And applications that are submitted between January and March will have a final report deadline of December 31st, 2026. Those final reports are completed in Smart Simple. Once you're done with your grant agreement form and that's been fully executed, the final report will populate within your dashboard so you can access it at any time. So you do need to submit by those deadlines, and you're also agreeing to either spend or obligate your grant funding by that deadline as well. So you need to have all of your funds need to be spent or obligated by either August 15th or December 31st, depending on your deadline. If you are not awarded after you have submitted a grant application, we definitely encourage you to try again. This is a very, very popular program, and because it's so popular, it has become rather competitive. So we encourage you, try again, don't give up. We are available, Emily and myself, we are available to gather feedback from the panelists who reviewed your application, and we can then send that written feedback to you. And so that's a really great learning opportunity of understanding, where different areas could be strengthened or clarified. So if you're interested in receiving that type of feedback, when you receive the notification saying you were not awarded, there's a link within that to complete a brief form. You would complete the form and then just allow for several weeks for processing. We always have a very, very, very long list of requests. So it typically takes about 6 to 8 weeks to gather that feedback and send it along to you. All right, and with that, we have a couple of frequently asked questions that I'm going to pass over to Emily.
Great, thanks, Laura. Some of the information I'm going to share is just kind of in a different context, so you should be able to answer these along with me reading them. But just for clarification, these are some common questions that we get throughout the process when we're working with applicants. One of them is, my project is still in the early planning stage. Can I still apply? And the answer here is yes. We would recommend reviewing the application types that we went over today and the rubrics carefully. Much of the scoring is based on those specific details and thorough descriptions. If details are in the early stages, you might consider applying for that planning and development option that we mentioned. If you're not sure, again, just connect with Laura or myself and we can discuss it further with you. Another question we get is, I'm looking for funding to support living expenses and I don't have a specific project in mind. Can I apply for the creativity grant? The answer here is probably a no. The creativity grant is intended to support a project-specific application. So if the application, we're looking for details that are associated with a specific project to be eligible. So if you're an artist looking for support for, say, day-to-day expenses, living and working expenses in general, you might want to consider looking at the Grants for Artists program instead. That's a newer program through the State Arts Council. It's not currently open right now, but it's intended to be opened in the next couple of months, closer to the winter. So just tag that for looking at our social media and emails that come out and those program pages on our website. Another question that we're asked is, my project has received previous creativity funding. Can I apply again in a new fiscal year? And here it really is it depends answer. A project can be only funded once. However, if there are different phases or iterations of a project, future funding might be possible if the grant would clearly support different expenses and fall into one of those scenarios where you would get planning and development or implementation. So again, talk to Laura or myself on this particular scenario if you will come across that. Another question is, I'm eligible and applying for another State Arts Council grant. Can I also apply for the creativity grant in the same month? And the answer here is yes. You can apply and receive multiple grants in the same fiscal year through the State Arts Council and in the same month even. Each grant program has its own different goals and purposes to support the different needs of the art sector. So really check the eligibility for each of the program guidelines just to make sure you are indeed eligible to apply for 2 different or even 3 different programs. Another question we get is, my project is already complete. can I submit for reimbursement of expenses? The answer here is no. We cannot reimburse for previously completed projects. You must submit an application before the completion of a project to be considered eligible. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're planning out your timeline, when to apply, when to expect funds. Just make a note that you would need to apply before the project and activities take place. Another question here is, I would like the grant to cover expenses associated with bringing a non-Maryland artist to Maryland. Is that allowed? And the answer here is possibly. If the grant funding would support a non-Maryland artist, it's recommended that you share a clear description as to why that particular artist would bring significant value to your project and to Maryland audiences. And again, if you're not really sure, just check in with Laura and myself, and we'd be able to help answer any of those questions around the eligibility of that particular expense or person in your application. And a couple more here. My implementation application includes expenses for earlier planning steps that weren't funded through a planning or development grant. Is that okay? And the answer here is yes. A planning and development grant is not a requirement to receive implementation support. So if an implementation grant shares all the details and steps outline how you fully realize your project, including steps of planning and preparation, that's okay to include in an implementation grant. If you do not require funding for those two separate phases necessarily, you can simply apply just for implementation. You don't have to have the planning and development first. You can just do the full project. I received a planning development earlier in the fiscal year. Can I apply for an implementation grant later in the same fiscal year? And the answer here is no. You're only eligible to apply for that one creativity grant per fiscal year. So you might consider this when you're making your decisions of when and how to apply. So there's some things to keep in mind. If you're getting to the end of one fiscal year and then about to go into the next fiscal year, you might consider splitting up planning and then implementation the next fiscal year. But again, be in touch with us if you have any questions about how you want to, what grant application to apply for and within the context of a timeline. Okay, I think this is the last one. How can I share work samples, letters of support, reviews, etc.? Again, external documents are not considered as part of the review of the creativity grant application. As Laura mentioned earlier, panelists will only review the 3 narrative questions per the scoring criteria. So don't include important information in a link, or another document that might be in the attachment section, as they will not be considered. And we provide that guidance to the panelists not to open external documents. They're really honing in on the context within the application itself. Okay, and then another helpful hint here is to apply early when you can. While you're eligible to apply anytime for the creativity grant during that time that it's open between now and the end of March, we really encourage folks to apply early whenever you can. As Laura mentioned earlier, the payment process is outside of the State Arts Council offices, so it does take several weeks to go through that payment process alone. So you might take that into consideration when you're determining to apply, along with the context of the monthly application cycle too. So you can kind of backtrack of when you need and come up with a time of when to apply. Some other things to keep in mind that before you submit your application, Laura and I are available to review your draft application and offer feedback in connection to the scoring rubric as well. We can only provide feedback once per application. We can't review multiple drafts along the way with you. So you might consider having a really strong application draft. Consider some of those helpful hints that Laura mentioned early, having somebody else review it for you and making sure you've got all the strong details within your application before sending to us. Also, we ask that you be courteous in your requests. We have a lot of people that are asking for help and typically have a pretty lengthy list of feedback requests. So if you're somebody who's received funding in the past, or if you've your last application scored really high, but it just was declined, might have been just under the funding threshold for the month, you might consider allowing others to access our assistance to get further support. But of course, we are here to support you at whatever stage you're at. So just email Laura and myself if you'd like feedback on your draft, and we'll put you in that listing of request. But again, just allow for several weeks. Sometimes it can take upwards of 6 to 8 weeks at any point in the year to receive that written feedback. So again, just something to consider within your timeline and your plan to apply. Okay, so I'm going to review a couple other slides of where you apply. There's just a couple more slides here. So if you've not applied for any State Arts Council grants before, just to know that our grant platform is called Smart Simple. So all applications must be submitted through Smart Simple, and you can access that through marylandarts.smartsimple.com. As an applicant, you'll need to register if you've not done so already within Smart Simple to apply. And what that might look like, the landing page here on your screen has a typical login credential. So you'd use your email to log in and a password and log in like you'd normally do. But if you do not have an account with Smart Simple, you'll notice there's a blue register button on the same landing page. You would want to click into that and complete all of the required information. And then you'd get set up with an account and a password. And then once you do that, you log into Smart Simple. You would come to your dashboard, which might look something like this. To find the applications that are available, including the creativity grant, you'd want to click in the opportunity section, which is typically on the far left side of your screen of your dashboard under My Applications. You would click into those opportunities, and it would come up to a listing that looks something like this on your screen. These will shift and change throughout the year depending on what applications are open, but you would see the creativity grant for project-based support in your listing, and you'd click the Apply Now button that's directly next to that. Once that opens up, it'll bring you to the application itself, and it'll look something like this with a lot of instruction towards the top. What we typically recommend when you first get started is to click that Save Draft button, and it'll basically activate the application for you so you can see everything on the different tabs. From that point on, the application does auto save, but it's always kind of a good practice to click that Save Draft button as you're entering information, just in case. But the application will take you through each section that's required. And then when you're ready, you would hit Submit, which is that other blue button with a little check mark. And you are set. So again, if you have any questions, Laura and I are here to help. Our emails are on the screen here, but we do have a few minutes. If anybody would like to vocalize any questions or add anything else in the chat, we are here to help answer those. And you can feel free to use that raise hand feature that's at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop. Might look a little different if you're on a device.
Hey, this is Nair. I emailed you earlier today, Emily.
Yes,
I guess
yes.
that's last week, but yeah, thank you guys for offering this information. I just wondered about like the applications you get monthly. Is it usually the case that like all the applications you get that would receive a grant are able to receive a grant, or is it like sometimes you guys have like more than, you know what I mean, like more qualified people than you're able to offer? Or how does that like break down? Or do you all know since you don't review them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start, and Laura, you can certainly fill in with questions here. So the way it works is that we get a specific budgeted amount for each of our different programs. So the creativity grant starts out with a specific allocation, and each month, you know, it varies in terms of the number of applications that we receive, but we do try to give out about the same amount, generally speaking, each month. So we look at the different applications that come through and determine kind of a threshold based on the comprehensive scoring of our panelists, and have kind of what we call like a funding threshold or a cutoff point with how much funding we have and who rises to the top in terms of the comprehensive scoring and those each month. So overall, it's a pretty competitive program. We do get a lot of applications, and there's some good ones that we do have to turn down from month to month. So we do, that's kind of part of our recommendations of applying early in case you're not awarded in that first time, to come back and try again and get some feedback to strengthen your application.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think you guys answered like many of the other questions I would have had as far as us chatting. So yeah, thank you so much.
Great, of
Very
course.
helpful.
I just want to pull out, there's a question in the chat here from Marcy. Hi, Marcy. It says, I haven't seen if this has been asked. You mentioned the arts and entertainment districts being not eligible for this, being allowed to submit. It looks like you're asking because you are an independent artist applying within an organization within an arts and entertainment district. So it's Marcy, just to clarify, it's the Arts and Entertainment District itself. That entity is not eligible for support through the Creativity Grant. So if you are an independent artist practicing in an Arts and Entertainment District, that can be allowable. It's just the actual entity of the Arts and Entertainment District itself as a business. They would not be eligible for support. But certainly, you know, if there's questions or how that's kind of intertwined with your work, we can also talk one-on-one about that.
Hi, Lauren and Emily.
Yeah.
Hi. I had a question. You said that we could apply for different grants in the same period with MSAC. Can they be for the same project, or are they supposed to be for different projects? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Based on how our grant programs are set up, there, like we said, there's kind of different goals and objectives for each of our grant programs. So how it comes out that it shouldn't be for the same project. So the answer is no, I think, but there might be a case where, you know, there might be elements that connect to a different project. So for example, if you're getting training through a specific source, you might be able to apply for professional development for that learning and training, and then that might apply to a project later on in creativity. So that would be eligible, but you wouldn't be able to apply for, you know, training or, you know, a learning opportunity through professional development and creativity, just as an example. If there's something that's specific to you, we'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one in case there might be something else that's coming up that might look a little different, and we can help you determine the best project or program through our offerings.
Okay. Thank you. That clarifies a lot, but I probably will have more questions for you later.
Yeah, certainly reach out and we can talk about it one-on-one.
Sure.
Any other questions that are coming up for you all? We have about 1 more minute here. And there were questions that came up in the chat. So if you all were following along, you probably got some answers there as well. But I think we'll go ahead and close out for the day. So thanks everybody for joining us, which is probably during your lunch hour, and spending an hour with us to go through the Creativity Grant. As we've mentioned, this recording will be posted on the website along with the slide deck. And of course, reach out to either of us if you have any questions as you're moving through the process. All right. Thanks and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.